Inside the towering Kashim Palace, the rain tapped against the windows like tiny drummers announcing something unsaid. It was nearly 1 a.m., but President Ibrahim Traoré was still seated behind his wide mahogany desk. He didn't need sleep. Not tonight. His coffee sat untouched, growing cold. His eyes were sharp, fixed not on the papers in front of him, but on the silence. The city outside was quiet, too quiet. He had been in enough battles to know when silence meant peace, and when it meant danger. Tonight, it was the latter. There had been smiles during his meetings all week. Too many smiles, too rehearsed. He sensed the shift in the air, like the stillness before a storm. Something was coming, something close. That was when the knock came. 3 soft taps. No guards announced the visitor. Strange. Traoré stood, his instincts kicking in. He opened the door himself. A palace aide, shaking slightly, handed him a small envelope with no name, no stamp, nothing but 4 hurried words scrawled across the front in black ink. Be careful. It's inside. Traoré didn't say a word. He closed the door gently behind him and returned to his desk. He sat down, peeled open the envelope, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a list of names, all military. Some he knew well. A few were his friends. 1 or 2 were regulars at his weekly briefings. His heartbeat stayed calm, but inside his mind sharpened like a blade. He picked up the desk phone, paused, and then changed his mind. No phone calls. This had to be quiet. By sunrise, he had summoned someone he trusted beyond question. Captain Ilyas Bayo, a young but highly disciplined intelligence officer who had once uncovered a foreign spy embedded in the Ministry of Energy. Bayo stood tall in front of the president's desk. Ilyas Traoré said slowly, I need you, quietly. No one must know, not even the generals. Bayo nodded without hesitation. Yes, Mr. President. Traoré handed him the list. Follow these names. Observe. Don't confront. Don't speak. Not yet. Bayo scanned the list, recognizing at least half the names. And if I find something, don't report by phone. Traoré said. Come to me directly. This isn't politics, Ilyas. This is war. That night, Bayo vanished into the streets of Ouagadougou. He discarded his uniform, took on a new identity, and disappeared into the shadows. He moved through alleyways, markets, and abandoned roads, always watching, always listening. He trusted no one, not even officers who'd once served beside him. His first target was Colonel Massamba Diallo, commander of the elite 7th Regiment stationed outside the capital. Diallo was a national hero, brave, decorated, unshakably composed. But something about him didn't sit right. Bayo followed him discreetly for 3 nights. On the 4th, Diallo slipped away from the base and drove without his official convoy to a secluded house on the city's edge. No guards, no lights, just 4 military officers inside. Bayo climbed onto a nearby rooftop, watching through a crack in the curtains. He used a parabolic mic to capture muffled voices. He's moving too fast, one voice said. He ended the deal with Lion Tech. Now funding's dry. If we don't act soon, everything we've built will vanish. Another replied, we strike before Independence Day. One move, no mistakes. He's out. We bring in leadership that listens. France returns. Order returns. Bayo's stomach turned. It wasn't just discontent. It was treason. He slipped away before the meeting ended and returned to the palace before dawn. Guards saluted as he entered, unaware of the storm he carried in his satchel. Audio recordings, photos, names. President Traoré was already awake, staring out at the gray sky from his private balcony. Bayo entered and saluted. It's real, he said. Traoré turned. They're planning a coup. Before the celebration, they've already picked your replacement. Traoré's face didn't flinch. He opened the folder and listened to the recordings, one by one. Then he said quietly, we don't panic. Come, we prepare. By noon, he left the palace without his usual convoy. No one followed him. He drove himself to an abandoned military post outside Ouagadougou, an old communications bunker left from the Liberation War. Inside, 5 hand-picked allies waited: 1 former general, a loyal sergeant major, 2 civilian analysts, and a young cyber warfare expert. Traoré placed the evidence on the table. These men are not rebels, he said. They are trained. Some of them wore this flag beside me in battle. Now they want to sell it to the highest bidder. One of the civilians clenched his fists. We should arrest them now. Traoré shook his head. If we move too early, we'll only catch the pawns. The mind behind this will escape. Bayo leaned forward. You think there's someone higher? Traoré didn't hesitate. I know there is. Diallo doesn't have the strategy for this. Someone's behind him. The room went silent. Traoré continued. We'll let them go just far enough. Then we strike. And when we do, no bloodshed, no chaos. We cut off the head. Outside, the sun rose over a city, still unaware of the storm brewing. Inside that forgotten bunker, the president of Burkina Faso was already 10 steps ahead. For the next 5 days, President Ibrahim Traoré lived 2 lives, one in the light, one in the shadows. By day, he gave speeches, cut ribbons, posed for cameras, and shook the hands of dignitaries. He smiled for the press and praised his people's strength and unity. To the world, he looked calm. To his enemies, he looked vulnerable. But behind the scenes, the president was preparing for war. Each night, he met with Captain Ilias Bayo and the small, trusted circle. Their meeting location changed daily. Sometimes a shipping container near the river. Sometimes a cave in the cliffs outside the city. Phones were never brought. All information was passed face to face. Bayo continued to observe the conspirators. His targets moved cautiously, but they believed they were still unseen. He watched Colonel Massamba Diallo meet with another name from the list, Major Tariq Sango, an expert in logistics who had recently transferred control of the central weapons depot. Together, they met 3 men who didn't speak the local language and wore European boots. Foreigners. Bayo captured photos, recorded voices, and followed their money trails. It was massive. Stacks of untraceable currency being exchanged in envelopes. Whispers of France is ready, and references to restoring stability. That was their excuse. Stability. In truth, they wanted power, and they were willing to sell their country to get it. On the 5th night, Bayo heard the final confirmation. The coup would happen the night before Independence Day, during a scheduled training drill. One of the palace's own generals, General Simon Gora, was in charge of coordinating the security for the ceremony. He was already planning to quietly replace loyal soldiers with rebels. Bayo couldn't believe it. Gora had stood beside Traoré in every major parade, every national broadcast. He was even photographed helping deliver supplies to flood victims last year. But that was the nature of betrayal. It always came from someone close enough to shake your hand. Bayo returned to the president with the final report. Traoré read through it slowly, absorbing every word. The deeper they dug, the more layers of treachery they uncovered. Then Bayo handed him a sealed envelope. There's one more name, he said. Traoré opened it and stopped breathing for a second. General Issa Diarra. The president didn't speak. He stared at the name. Diarra was more than a general. He was family, not by blood, but by battle. They had fought together during the uprising. When Traoré was wounded in the north, it was Diarra who carried him on his back for 10 miles through enemy lines. When Traoré became president, Diarra was the first man he promoted. They had shared fire, fear, and food. And now, this can't be, Traoré said at last. Bayo stood firm. He met with them twice. I saw it myself. The room went quiet. Traoré stood and walked to the window. The night air was still. He could hear the distant hum of motorbikes and dogs barking. But in his chest, a war was raging. Betrayal is heavier than bullets. He turned back. And we move tomorrow night. He summoned his closest military advisors, not to the palace, but to an abandoned underground command center built during the Liberation War. Few remembered it existed. There, beneath concrete and steel, he laid out the plan, Operation Thunderwolf. Each move was calculated, timed with the precision of a surgeon. They would let the coup leaders gather, let them think they'd already won. The fake training drill would be used against them. At exactly 11:47 p.m., but as the rebel units approached the palace, they would find all entrances sealed off and controlled by loyal forces in disguise. Meanwhile, elite squads would surround the coup meeting point. No shots unless absolutely necessary. The goal was to capture the leaders alive and reveal the truth to the people. The map of Ouagadougou was laid out under a dim light. Captain Bayo pointed at a small square on the edge of the city. "This is where Diarra, Diallo, and the others will be." Traoré stared at it, then said, "No killing. I want them alive. The people need to see the faces of those who tried to sell them out." The team nodded. Then Traoré added one more order, "And find the mole inside my palace." Someone passed the security codes. "We need them." The next 24 hours moved like clockwork. Troops were quietly rotated, secret files locked, surveillance intensified. While Traoré gave a speech on education reform that afternoon, Bayo was beneath the ground setting up surveillance equipment. And at sunset, Traoré dismissed his entire palace guard and replaced them with a covert unit in plain uniforms. No one would suspect what was coming. At 10 p.m., he changed into civilian clothes and drove himself to the command center. He didn't bring an aide, didn't notify his staff, just him and the plan. He sat with the war map in front of him, watching the red dots move into place. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Then at 11:44 p.m., the radio crackled. "They're moving." At 11:47 p.m., the fake training drill began. From the outside it looked ordinary. A scheduled nighttime readiness exercise, conducted every year before Independence Day. Soldiers moved into position. Radios crackled, checkpoints were activated. But this year there was something different. The traitors believed they were in control. They weren't. Colonel Massamba Diallo led a small unit of conspirators toward the palace gates. He wore a blank expression, but his heart was pounding. Everything had been prepared. The guards bribed, the security codes stolen, the loyalists reassigned, or so he thought. When he approached the main gate, he gave a slight nod, a signal. The guards looked back at him. No movement, no reaction. Diallo narrowed his eyes. He repeated the gesture. Still nothing. "Open the gate," he ordered. One of the guards stepped forward. "I'm afraid I can't do that, sir." Diallo's face twitched. "What did you say?" "I said the gate stays closed tonight." Before Diallo could react, floodlights snapped on. Dozens of rifles were already trained on him and his men. A voice rang out from a loudspeaker. "Colonel Massamba Diallo, drop your weapon. You are under arrest for conspiracy against the Republic." Diallo hesitated for a second, then reached for his holster. But the guards were faster. In moments he was tackled to the ground, disarmed, and bound. Meanwhile, across the city at the edge of the industrial zone, General Issa Diarra and Major Tarek Sango were entering an abandoned warehouse. It was their final meeting before the operation began. Inside were stacks of maps, radio gear, and weapons ready to be distributed. They didn't know they were walking into a trap. Captain Ilyas Bayo was already waiting in the rafters with a full strike team. When Diarra entered, he scanned the room. Something felt off. "Where's Colonel Diallo?" he asked. "He's en route," Sango replied. Diarra looked around. Something's wrong. Then he saw it, the camera, small, barely visible, blinking in the corner. His hand moved toward his gun. From above, Bayo gave the signal. Now, dozens of soldiers dropped from the shadows. "Down on your knees, weapons on the floor." Sango froze. Diarra drew his pistol, but Bayo was faster. With a single move, he knocked it away and drove him backward onto the concrete floor. Diarra lay there, staring up at Bayo. You were the shadow." "No," Bayo replied. "I was the mirror. You betrayed yourself." Within minutes, all key coup leaders were arrested. The weapons were seized, the foreign money documented. Every detail was logged, every file secured. By 12:30 a.m., the city was locked down. Roads were sealed. Airports, radio towers, and military bases were under full control. Back at the underground command center, President Traoré stood silently over the war map, his arms folded. The red dots representing the enemy were disappearing one by one. "Status report," he said. "Primary targets neutralized," replied Bayo over the secure line. "No casualties." "Good," Traoré said. He didn't smile. His eyes remained fixed on the map. "We're not done yet." At 1 a.m., the palace was secure. President Traoré returned, not in his motorcade, but alone in a plain vehicle. He entered through the rear gate, where 2 loyal guards saluted him, and quickly shut the doors behind him. The press still had no idea. Inside his office, he removed his jacket and sat for a moment in silence. Then came a knock. Captain Bayo entered, slightly bruised but alert. "It's done," he said. "They're all in custody." Traoré nodded. "And the foreign contacts?" Bayo handed him a folder. "We're still tracing the money, but we have voice recordings, clear evidence they were working with foreign agents." Traoré opened the file and scanned the transcripts. Mentions of embassy meetings, encrypted phone calls, and promises of exile, villas and offshore accounts. It wasn't just betrayal, it was treason, funded from outside. He looked up. "I want them tried publicly." Bayo raised an eyebrow. "Even Diarra?" Traoré hesitated. "Especially Diarra. The people need to see this. They need to understand how deep the roots of corruption go." He stood and walked to the window. Outside, Ouagadougou was quiet, peaceful, but he knew how close they had come to collapse. "If we had waited another hour," he said softly, "we'd be in handcuffs," Bayo replied. At 3 a.m., the first stage of the public plan was launched. Traoré ordered the national radio to prepare an emergency broadcast. No images, only his voice. At 7:30 a.m., Burkina Faso woke up to an unexpected message. Last night, the president's calm voice said, "A group of men, trained and armed, attempted to overthrow your government. They failed." People across the country paused. Taxi drivers turned up their radios. Market vendors stopped arranging their stalls. Soldiers leaned closer to loudspeakers in their barracks. "They did not come from outside," Traoré continued. "They came from within, from our own ranks. People we trusted, people we greeted with honor." There was a long silence, then but they forgot something. "This country is not for sale." He ended the broadcast with 5 final words. "We are still standing strong." The city of Ouagadougou remained strangely calm after the broadcast. Most people didn't understand the full weight of what had happened. They only knew that something serious had been stopped in the dead of night, and that their president was still standing. By 9 a.m., whispers had become rumors. By noon, rumors turned into questions. On social media, the name General Issa Diarra started trending. Was he arrested? Is it true he was plotting a coup, or did someone like him betray the president? President Ibrahim Traoré didn't wait for the speculation to spiral. At 1 p.m., he walked into the press briefing room at the Kashim Palace. No ceremony, no grand entrance, just him dressed in full military uniform, his face unreadable. Journalists immediately quieted. Traoré looked at them for a moment, then spoke slowly. There was almost no country left this morning. No one moved. He laid a file on the podium and opened it. Photos, maps, handwritten notes and transcripts. Everything the public was not supposed to see. "Last night we stopped a military coup, not with gunfire, not with tanks, but with truth, discipline, and loyalty." He pointed to one photo, Diarra, Sango and Diarra sitting around a map. These men were decorated soldiers, respected, trusted, and yet they plotted to overthrow the will of the people for foreign promises and private power. Gasps filled the room. Traoré continued, "This government is not made of iron, it's made of people, people like you. And when someone tries to sell the people's will to the highest bidder, we don't just call it treason, we call it an attack on all of us." He held up a small audio device. "Would you like to hear them say it for themselves?" He pressed play. The room fell silent again as the voices of the coup leaders came through. Talks of replacing Traoré, restoring foreign control, re-establishing old alliances, and receiving compensation in return. When the audio ended, some journalists were visibly shaking. Traoré spoke again. "From this day forward, every general, every commander, every senior official will be questioned. We will not hunt for revenge, but we will hunt for truth." The next morning, the largest investigation in Burkina Faso's military history began. A special committee was formed, led by Captain Elias Bayo, a retired Supreme Court judge.
and an independent journalist. Its mission was clear: investigate loyalty, transparency, and corruption at every level of command. Every officer, no matter how high their rank, was summoned. They were each asked the same question: where were you the night your country almost died?
Those who hesitated were flagged. Those who lied were removed. Many expected mass arrests, but Traoré didn't want fear. He wanted reform. Within a week, 12 high-ranking officials were quietly dismissed. Their positions were filled not by family members or friends, but by junior officers who had demonstrated discipline and dedication. Traoré made a bold move. He opened military promotions to citizen review. Community leaders, school teachers, and even farmers were allowed to submit feedback on local officers. It was radical, unprecedented, and the people loved it. Meanwhile, the traitors were placed in a high-security military facility outside the capital. No television, no visitors, no chance of escape. Each one was assigned a team of legal experts, and their trials were scheduled to begin within 30 days, fully televised. But there was one final piece Traoré had yet to reveal: the inside man, the traitor within the palace. Captain Bayo found him 3 days after the arrests. A mid-level clerk in the communications office named Sergeant Malik Tambara. Quiet, forgettable, harmless, or so he seemed. He had passed security codes to the coup leaders in exchange for the promise of asylum in Europe. When confronted, he didn't deny it. "I didn't think it would work," he muttered. "I just wanted out." Bayo brought him directly to the president. Tambara stood in front of Traoré, shaking. "I have nothing to say," he whispered. Traoré studied him. "You had access to the security of this nation. You betrayed your oath for an escape plan?" Tambara nodded, ashamed. Traoré said nothing for a while. Then he dismissed everyone from the room. For 10 minutes, no one knows what was said inside. When the door opened, Tambara walked out, eyes red, face pale. He was taken into custody, but not shackled, not silenced. Later that evening, Traoré addressed the military academy. No cameras, no reporters, just a hall filled with cadets in training. He stood before them, looking tired but resolute. "The enemy will not always come with guns," he said. "Sometimes, they come with promises. Promises of comfort, promises of safety. But real loyalty is not proven in peace. It's proven in pressure." He pointed to a young soldier in the front row. "Would you trade your flag for a flight?" The cadet shook his head. Traoré nodded. "Then remember this: Burkina Faso is not held together by borders or buildings. It's held together by people who refuse to give it away." The cadets stood and saluted. Outside, night had fallen again. But this time, the president knew the shadows had fewer places left to hide. 10 days had passed since the failed coup. Burkina Faso was calm, but different. On the surface, daily life resumed. Markets buzzed, students returned to school, soldiers patrolled the streets with steady eyes. But underneath, the country was alive with purpose. People whispered less about fear and more about justice. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't declare victory. He declared renewal. He moved quietly, relentlessly, like a sculptor chiseling corruption out of stone. One by one, he summoned generals, governors, ministers, those who had once spoken loudly, but now sat in silence. He didn't ask for their loyalty. He asked them one question: do you still serve the people or yourself? Those who stumbled over their answers were dismissed. Some resigned, others were replaced. For the first time in decades, Burkina Faso's halls of power echoed with unfamiliar voices. Teachers, medics, mechanics, and veterans, now stepping into roles once reserved for elites. Traoré formed a People's Oversight Council, a rotating body of ordinary citizens, selected from every province, given real access to monitor government decisions. It shocked the bureaucrats. It thrilled the public. At one televised session, a woman from a rural village asked the Minister of Defense why his office had 42 cars, but her region had no ambulances. The minister resigned the next day. Meanwhile, the trials began. The courtroom was packed with reporters and citizens. The coup leaders were brought in one by one, handcuffed but unbroken. General Traoré was the first to take the stand. He didn't beg, he didn't deny. He stared straight ahead as the charges were read. The prosecutor presented the evidence: recordings, documents, foreign transfers, testimonies, including one from Sergeant Malik Tambara, the man who had betrayed the palace but chose to testify instead of run. When asked why, Tambara said, "I believed their promises, but the president kept his." The trial stunned the nation. Seen for decades, power in Burkina Faso had been untouchable. Now it stood trial, and the people were watching. Traoré was sentenced to life in prison. Sango and Diallo received 20 years. Others were handed lighter sentences based on cooperation. But the message was clear: no rank is above the republic. Outside the courtroom, people gathered, not in anger, but in awe. Some cried, some clapped, some stood silent with hands over hearts. Not for the punishments, but for the proof that truth still had a place. President Traoré didn't attend the trials. He didn't need to. His fight had moved on. In the weeks that followed, foreign envoys came knocking. Some praised him, others warned him. One official, speaking on behalf of a former colonial power, said, "Your country needs our support to survive." Traoré looked him in the eye. "My country needs its soul more than your support." That quote was printed on t-shirts the next day. He wasn't trying to be a legend. He was trying to be a mirror, one that reflected what people had always hoped leadership could be. Late one night, after a long day of reviewing agricultural reform proposals, Traoré stood alone on the palace balcony. The city lights blinked below like fireflies. His phone buzzed, an incoming message. It was from Captain Ilias Bayo. "Surveillance confirms new suspicious activity near the northern border. I'll update soon." Traoré replied simply, "Understood. Stay alert." He put the phone down and looked out at the horizon. In the distance beyond the hills, trouble was always possible. But the lion doesn't sleep because of jackals. He closed his eyes, listening to the wind. He remembered the jungle. He remembered hunger, gunfire, betrayal, and survival. He remembered the people who had marched beside him when there was no title, no palace, just hope. That's what he fought for, not perfection, but a future where no child would have to trade loyalty for food. The next morning, President Traoré visited a school in a dusty province 2 hours outside the capital. No media, no speechwriters, just him, a small convoy, and a heart that still believed in children's laughter. He sat on a wooden bench and spoke to students about history, about freedom, about responsibility. One child asked, "Are you afraid they'll try again?" Traoré looked at him. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm not afraid." "Why not?" the boy asked. "Because this time," Traoré said, "they'll have to face all of you for." He smiled. The boy smiled back. And across the country, the people who once whispered in fear began to speak with strength, because in their hearts they knew the lion wasn't watching over them anymore. He was standing among them.